Good morning, everyone. Thank you for watching another episode of Lessons Learned, the dumbest thing I've ever done with money. My name is Suzanne, and I'm the head coach at G.R.A.C.E Financial Coaching. And I am super excited to have Liz Polinsky with us today. Liz is a certified EFT marriage counselor and supervisor candidate practicing in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Liz's goal is to help couples who want to grow and change their relationship into one where both people feel understood, accepted, and cared for, but they just need a little support to get there. As a military spouse, she has a passion for working with military and veteran couples. And Liz has her own podcast that she hosts called the Communicate and Connect podcast for military relationships. Hey, Liz, how are you?
I'm doing really great. Yeah, thanks for having me on your podcast. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. So tell me about a little about the podcast you're currently hosting, the Communicate and Connect podcast for military relationships.
Yes, yeah. This was a COVID project for me. I needed like a hobby.
Amen.
And I work as a marriage counselor. I would say like 75% of my caseload consistently is either an active duty military couple or a veteran.
Okay.
But I really wanted to be able to help more military couples. Some of the common concerns that I would encounter working with military couples was it was always hard to get scheduling because people didn't know their schedules. Like even my husband, he's often checking his phone like the night before to figure out,
Yeah.
oh, what's my schedule tomorrow?
What am I doing tomorrow? Right.
Yeah. So getting like actually setting an appointment and being able to come was oftentimes a challenge for military couples. And then I was also feeling judgmental. So I'll just own my judgment. How about that?
No, that's great.
So I do not like military one source. I love that it is a service that is available for people. But my experience has been that when it comes to couple therapy, people are paired with somebody who is not trained in couples therapy and is not able to really provide quality marriage counseling services. So I'm sure this is not 100%, but I have never seen the reverse. I've never seen.
No. And it's based off your experience, and you guys have been stationed throughout the country. And if that's the consistent experience, at some point, the stereotype becomes true, because that's what you've experienced. Definitely. Didn't just something that came to mind while you were mentioning that was my husband's been in the military for getting very close to 20 years. Sorry, babe. And just getting help for one of his junior sailors was a process, let's call it that. And it took weeks to help somebody who really needed help in that moment. And luckily he's okay. But man, was that frustrating, to know that system is set up to help, but it's set up in such a way that it could take too long to get the help that's needed.
Yeah, there are so many factors, and I think it's just so much more complicated for military couples trying to get help than it is for a civilian couple. And I'm trying to decide like how far deep into this rabbit hole do we go? But I think the summary of it is that I wasn't happy with the quality of care. Like we went through Military One Source for premarital counseling, and the lady didn't even work with couples. She didn't even work with adults. She worked with like foster kids.
Oh my God.
And she never once asked us in like 6 sessions, what do you want to work on? And so then I had to be the one to say like, well, we have this thing that we're trying to work through before we get married. And then she was like, oh yeah, I can't help you. It's like, great, thanks for the waste of time. So that was my personal experience with Military One Source. And I've heard a lot of other stories about couples going to couples therapy with somebody who is a dabbler versus somebody who is really a couples therapist
Got it.
and not getting help. And so I do feel prickly. I'm sure you can hear it in my voice. I get really irritated about this. This having like really high quality couples counseling matters.
Right.
Um, so I created this podcast to try to help share some of like the very concrete tools that couples can use together to help improve their relationship, as well as discuss some of like the science behind what helps um, couples have a strong marriage for the long term, as well as go over people's stories, specifically
Mm,
military couples stories of like how did they navigate those really challenging periods of moves and deployments and being separated and then reintegrating, and how do we figure that out as a couple and a family. Um,
mhm.
so I am really excited about the podcast, and I'm hoping that it's going to be really helpful for a lot of military couples. And I will be starting to actually this fall, starting to do workshops for military
Oh,
couples
great.
that are done in either a weekend long format or an 8-week class format.
Oh, that's great.
That, yeah, so I'm super stoked about that.
Yes. It's so, and we're living that life. We're both on the military Facebook pages and chat boards and stuff like that, where people are reaching out for help anonymously, and
Yes.
sometimes you just don't know what to send them to. And so that's going to be hugely helpful. It is, people don't realize that typically reintegration is actually harder than the person being gone. And that is huge challenge. Kids or no kids, whether you've been married for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years or 2 years, it's the reintegration process is very difficult when having typically a husband coming back from deployment.
Yes. It's an emotional roller coaster. And this is where counseling, in my opinion, is so important because it's all about how do we deal with our emotional world? How do we even understand what's happening on the inside? And I remember the first time my husband came back, um, I was like anxious. I was like driving, like to the dock to pick him
Here,
up, and I
yeah.
was all anxious and I was excited and I was so happy he was going to be home. And then I saw him, and immediately I was pissed, and I was so angry, and I was angry that he left me to begin with. And of course,
Yes.
he was like, "What is going on? Why are I'm finally home and you're mad at me?" like,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But this is like a normal emotional reaction when we think of it through like a therapy lens of what's happening. But if couples don't um, know that, then they're even just starting off with conflict. So
The most when my husband just got back a couple months ago, and one of the things that I felt like a broken record on was telling the younger girls uh right before they left, like so many people saying, I'm just so mad. I'm so mad, but he didn't
mhm.
do anything. And it's proven that one of the ways you separate yourself before deployment is by putting space between someone, and the way to put space between someone living in your house is to have an argument. And so one
Yeah.
of the reactions we have to protect ourselves emotionally and set ourselves up for that disappointment of 9 months, 10 months, 11 months, my husband was gone for 13 months one time,
Yeah.
is to create to set that boundary, and we're setting it in a negative way.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, that's absolutely true. Um, and if we didn't know that, like, no wonder someone would be like, I don't know if this relationship is for me, or maybe we won't survive this, or maybe I
Yeah.
shouldn't be married to someone in the military and I should just get a divorce and go somewhere else. Like that, that is important to know what is going to happen emotionally and why it happens and how
Yeah.
normal it is.
Yeah.
So,
Good.
yeah.
What made you lean towards marriage counseling specifically?
Oh yeah, I always wanted to do it. It's so interesting, I didn't know I didn't go into my field thinking I was gonna be a therapist. I sort of found my
Oh,
way here, and then I loved it, and I kept going. So, but my parents were a dual military couple, and they divorced, and part of the reason for their decline in their marriage was all of the stressors of military life. And my
mhm.
dad actually had a couple of divorces, and military life played a role.
Yeah.
So, and this is very common. So then when I became a therapist, I worked as a trauma therapist for the Department of Veterans Affairs. And
Wow.
another really common experience, at least for the veterans that I saw in my clinic, multiple marriages, even some of them who had gone through different, like traumatic experiences, they would tell me, one of the hardest things that I'm still struggling with is like why my marriage fell apart. And so it was something that I always sort of had a vague interest in couples counseling, but when you work for the government, individual therapy is the priority. And
Mhm.
so then when I met my husband, and I was like, "Whew, okay, I'm going to commit to this guy." And that means I'm going to move and leave my job. I decided, what if I'm gonna leave my dream job at the VA clinic that I was working at, I was gonna pursue this other dream of couples counseling. And
That's
so,
awesome.
yeah, that was several years ago now. Um, gosh, I think so. It's been at least for the past 4 years. I've worked almost
Mhm.
exclusively with couples, and
Wow.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and if you talk to therapists, most of the time you'll find out that they have something they like doing.
Hmm.
They like focusing on children, or they like focusing on the aspect of marriage and family therapy with children in the situation. I know somebody who specifically works with college student athletes,
Oh, yeah,
because
that's so niche.
especially D1 student athletes, because uh this is, pre name, image, and license, which the NCAA has recently instituted. But thinking back 2 to 3 years ago, those college students weren't paid, but boy, were they getting paid in the form of a full ride to some really expensive college. And if you can't keep up with the psychological pressures of staying on
Yeah,
that team and keeping your grades up, you could ruin the rest of your life. You could end up going
yeah,
on and paying $300,000 for an education, which I have quite a few people who have lots of student loan debt.
yes,
You could screw that up. And so that was a niche for her for a very, very, very long time. And then athletes in general. But man, if you're going to have that type of investment made in your life, you're going to have a giant school pay 200 pay out technically 200 $300,000 for you to play lacrosse and go to
yeah.
that school, and you screw that up because of the mental anguish and stuff that you have going on that you don't work out. Man, that could be so detrimental. So it can niche down, like you said, even to that small
Yes.
little population.
And so I'm gonna like cycle this back around. So, like, that's what I would want for everybody who ever listens to this episode. Like, if you're gonna see a therapist, I'd want you to find the therapist who is so excited to work with the thing that you want to work on.
Yeah.
Not someone who's like, oh, I work with kids. Why not try a couple?
You're just
you know?
getting married. It's no big deal.
Yes. Yeah. So,
Oh
yeah,
my
to
gosh.
find somebody who, like, this is what they do, is
Yeah.
they help people in your situation.
Yeah,
So,
take the time to find that person. Definitely,
yes.
100%. Well, Liz, I created this particular podcast to help
Mhm.
people realize we all make financial mistakes, but
Mhm.
hopefully some people out there listening will learn from the experience of others. So, Liz, what would you say is the dumbest thing you've ever done with money?
Yeah. So I use YNAB,
Yes,
which stands for You Need a Budget,
very
and it's
popular budgeting software for those who don't know.
yeah, very popular. I have been using it almost a year. So,
Mm.
when I guess like when we got married, I was used to doing money my way, and my husband is used to doing like thinking about money his way, and so I gave up my way to focus on his way, and it just was not working for me. So I started using YNAB about a year ago to try to feel like I had a much greater handle both on money in like the things that I personally pay for in our family life, and then also my business. So I use YNAB
Yeah.
for my business as well.
Yeah.
And
Keeping those business and personal expenses when you're a entrepreneur like we are can be very difficult. Definitely.
yes, yeah, and my how my business is doing directly impacts what my
Exactly.
personal finances look like. So Um, yeah, so I had, like I have to save money for taxes in my business, and I had put all of this money in a savings account, thinking that YNAB would not like would say like, oh, that's in a savings account. I'm not going to include that as part of the money that is going to like your
The
bills.
household. Yep. Yep. The household bills and things like that. Clothing, utilities, mortgage, rent, whatever. Yeah.
Yes. So I thought I had like 3 months of expenses already allocated for, and also this pot of savings.
Hmm.
So at the end of the year, I made a big investment with the savings, and then all of a sudden I was in the red, and I no longer had the 3 months of
Oh, no.
expenses saved up. So that was the I think that that is, like, the money moment that I'm most frustrated about.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and it was just because I was new to YNAB and I was not used to the system yet or how it
Mhm.
worked, and there were growing pains. And that one was a painful growing pain. And I
Yeah.
wish I had, um they have like blog articles and videos to teach you how to use the system. I probably should have watched more of those
I
to
Yep, I
understand.
am, a full disclosure on YNAB's list of, to become one of their certified coaches, and I still
Oh,
have to dive into that training. So they only accept certain people, and, I am in that process, but I have to get back on the horse in terms of getting in there and doing the training. Each budgeting software, Mint, Every Dollar, YNAB,
yeah,
Good Budgets, everything behaves differently. Um, and it's one of the things I think that stuck out to me is that you weren't getting a result for something you wanted, right? You felt a little out of control, so you're like, let me try the budgeting software, right?
yeah,
And just taking that step to create a budget is so difficult for some people. Incredibly difficult. I don't care if I send them an Excel sheet that they print out.
mhm.
It can be so difficult for some people. So how many months did you feel like, aside from the accounting error, really, how many months were you using YNAB until you felt like, oh, now I'm in the rhythm of having a budget, like that you personally felt like
Yeah,
you were in a good rhythm?
that's a great question because I think I started, um that's a really great question. I haven't even been using it a year yet.
Yeah.
So I wanna say probably sometime in the fall is when I
Okay.
started, and, is that true? You know what, I actually think I think I probably started, right before we moved and we PCSed. So I think that I started, but then because of the move, my
Yes.
finances were funky,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
it
Oh
threw
my
me
gosh.
off, and I
Yep.
had to like can't like delete everything and start over again. And I think I had to do that like 2 or 3 times before I figured out kind of like a rhythm with it. Um, but then it probably took like 3 or 4 months, and
Okay.
that financial snafu thing happened, like, right at the 3 or 4-month mark of feeling like I kinda had a feeling, and then I was like, "Oh, man, I missed that totally."
We blew it all
But
up again. Yeah. That's what I
yeah.
tell people when I speak to them. I'll get phone calls from people who are like, I don't want to work with a coach. I just want you to answer this question. I've been working on
Mm,
this budget for 6 months and it's not getting me anywhere. I truly subscribe to the theory that it takes a full year
mm,
to learn how to use one, any budgeting software, two, to teach yourself to budget, and three, to hold yourself accountable. What's the rule about like if you put a habit into place for 60 days, or if you put a routine into place for 60 days, now it becomes a habit after 60 days or whatever it is. But budgeting is just different because as much as we would love every month's budget to be exactly the same, that's
mhm.
literally impossible. You may have 2 months that look very similar, and you're going to have your normal mortgage or rent, utilities,
Yeah,
cell phone bill, Amazon, Hulu, subscriptions, whatever. You're going to have that groceries are going to be X unless there's major inflation. They're going to be X. Next month, they're going to be X plus Y, whatever.
yeah.
But then you have Christmas, which happens in December. I don't know if everybody knows that. Then you have things like military moves, which you
Mm,
can get an idea if you're moving every 2 years of what month that's going to happen. It doesn't mean it's going to be exact every single time. Deployments, kids going back to school, kids getting older and starting activities, putting your kid in daycare.
mm,
Every
mhm.
month can be totally, totally different. And so to me, you have to be doing this for a full year and looking at all of those annualized costs, things that happen every September, things that happen every December, things that happen every 2 years until you really, really get the rhythm of what your money looks like.
Yes. Yeah, that makes total sense to me because there are like, as a therapist, I have to renew my license,
All right.
and I'm licensed in, like, 4 states, and they're all, like, different timelines and different amounts, and then they happen some are every year, some are every other
Oh,
year,
yeah. Yep.
and then having to, like, plan, "Well, what does that mean this month? I need to put aside this month for that."
Right. If the renewal is $175 annually, okay, well, that one's kind of easy. If it's $500 every 3 years, okay, you really need to divide the $500 by 36 months and be putting tiny little chunks away in a sinking fund until you hit that next $500 payment in 3 years, depending on the state. Same thing goes with car registrations. Most states are a
Mhm.
year, some are two. Again, same thing. Some states require inspection stickers, some states require
Yeah.
smog inspections. And that's the stuff that, yes, it happens every year, but guys, like we're human
Yes.
and like other stuff comes up. So please stop beating yourself up over it. But if you have a budgeting system, again, it doesn't need to be YNAB, Mint, Every Dollar, Good Budget. Ugh, there's another one that I've got a client using. I have an older client using the Excel sheet every month. She just sends me her Excel sheet where she is mid-month and at the end of the month. And so it doesn't have to be rocket science, but when you know what's coming and when it's coming, it's just makes life so much easier, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. And then I one of the things that I like, um, about this process, I think that YNAB probably taught me to do was that when I have extra money, instead of just putting it into my fun,
Fun
"Oh,
money.
great, I'll spend it," is to, use it to assign things to the next month, so that way I can, have a few months saved, where, like, I know those bills are gonna be taken care of.
Right,
Um
right. I like to do that with groceries, like if especially
Mhm.
with prices of things right now, it's not happening as frequently, but if we were under on groceries, I would move it over to the next month. And
Yeah,
I would say, okay, you know what? If next month goes a little over, then that's not the end of the world. And then some, we have our set savings accounts, just like you have your, as a small business owner, most of us are paying quarterly taxes or our quarterly estimate in taxes, and we know what that's going to look like. But if for some reason we're not, then we've got to be putting that money away ourselves so that we
yeah,
have it at the end of the year. so that we have it at the end of the quarter. Because man, one of the hardest things to catch up on is taxes. It is almost impossible when you haven't trained yourself to put it away up front. It's almost impossible to break that. It's a vicious cycle, really.
Yeah.
What did you guys
feel overwhelmed? Taxes.
I know. What did you guys have when you got married that you were just like one thing, like your husband wouldn't have known that, you know, therapy licenses required renewal every year or something like that? Is there anything that when you guys got married, you were like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing people did, or I didn't know that was a thing that you did?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. Nothing immediately comes to my mind. I think the biggest, like, I don't know, like shocker for,
Yeah.
for our relationship was my student loans and his, because let's see, I think he had, you know, some sort of like military scholarship or something and had very minimal student loan debt. And mine is massive. And
right, you're going well beyond the just a bachelor's degree for sure. And I've got people who've got $110,000 for just their bachelor's degree because they took out loans for every single penny. So
it really adds up quickly. So I think that was the biggest like shock for him in terms of our finances and thinking through that.
All right. So my final question then is going to be from a marriage therapist standpoint, when you're having that conversation. Now, I've had this happen before. I'm sure you have too. Hopefully this conversation's happening before you guys get married, right? I have X number of student loan debt. I have X number of car debt. I have X number of credit card debt. Hopefully that's happening in advance. I have had clients who literally disclosed to their spouse in front of me how much student loan debt they had, and they've been married for years.
Yes.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
How do you broach that subject before the 5-year anniversary?
Yeah. So my one of my favorite tools is to have couples do a monthly marriage meeting. And my my husband now, we started doing this a few months into dating. And that was so great. You know, some stuff didn't apply back then. There's much more on our list now than there was back then. But like especially when we were dating and we were long distance for like a year and a half, and we would take turns flying to see each other once a month. Most of the time I was going there, but so sometimes we had some joint finances around traveling to see each other. So we started negotiating and talking about money that because of that. But I did tell him about my student loans in advance. One of the things that I was like, if I am going to leave my dream job to be with you and move across the country, then I want to get a PhD in couple therapy. And I'll be done maybe in like 3 months. So that's really exciting. But I told him, I was like, this is what my student loans are now. This is probably what they're going to be at the end of a PhD. And I need to do this. If you're going to ask me to leave my job, this is something I need to do. I'm fine with the debt, but you need to know. So, so I told him up front, because it was also part of my like negotiations of, this is what I need to commit at this level. But the monthly marriage meetings, I think, are the best way, because there's a dedicated time to talk about all the things that are needed conversations, like how's our quality time doing? Do we have money things that we need to be clear on? Do we need to talk about how household chores are going, or how we want to discipline kids, or like all of the needed couple discussions can happen during this meeting. Say that again.
In-law situations, right?
Yes, that too. Yeah. All of them. Yeah, we talk about in-law situations also. So like if we're traveling and like I think both of us are introverts and we need time to reset
Yep.
from all of the family dynamics. How are we going to handle that? How are we going to signal to each other? So those end up in these meetings for sure.
Nice.
But then it allows you to have your date night and your quality time together just be about spending time together. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I really need to tell you about this thing or we need to figure it out because that's taken care of during this monthly marriage meeting.
I love it. And in financial coach speak, we call it the budget committee meeting. So I wonder if we could combine the two things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Depending on what's going on, we always talk about finances. Sometimes we do it as a separate meeting and sometimes we
Mhm.
do it in the same meeting.
That's
Just
great.
depending on how much, like times where we were home buying a home or there was some like big financial stuff and we had to figure
For
it out,
sure.
those usually became separate meetings. But
Yeah.
when it's the regular monthly stuff, then we
Yeah.
just combined it in with our marriage meeting.
That's great. I love that. I think I'm going to employ that this afternoon.
Yeah, awesome.
Liz,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for sharing, for all of your honesty and your advice and sharing your financial blunders with YNAB. I
Yes.
hope everybody will join me next week for another episode of Lessons Learned, the dumbest thing I've ever done with money. And all of Liz's podcast and contact information is included in today's show notes. Thank you again, Liz.
Yeah.